Reading from the June 2023 Car and Driver. Editor's letter. Beast of burden. There's a 7.3-liter V8 hidden under the doghouse, and at full whack, its snare drum tumbling in a cement mixer soundtrack calls up memories of school buses. I'm climbing a mild grade through Arizona, not in a Bluebird or a Thomas, but in a Ford E350 chassis cab dually, and the engine trying out for the drumline is Ford's heavy-duty truck V8. In the doghouse? That's what people in the van world call the protruding engine cover that doubles as part of the dashboard. Another cross-country drive, my third in 9 months, this time at the wheel of a rented 16-foot box truck filled with my Los Angeles life. Hanging off the back is a car carrier with my soon-to-be wife's 2015 Ford Escape. At 65 miles an hour, the E-Series packed mule needs constant minding to keep it from wandering off to the right. Yet I'm forming a bond with this crude thing. 5 days with a vehicle carrying on its back nearly every valuable you own fosters appreciation and affection. That admiration leads to overlooking the ancient E-Series based design many shortcomings. Complaints seem trite and inappropriate. Constanoga wagon riders don't whine about the ride quality, wind noise, cushion softness, brake pedal feel, dim headlights, and non-existent sense of straight ahead, and neither will I. The current E-Series dates to 1992. Though its life as a van ended in 2014, it continues on as a chassis cab. Was it chassis cab? Imagine what's left behind after you flay a fish. In this case, a colantheth. Instead of a fish head, there's the cab of a van, and in place of the spine is a long ladder frame. It's the Lego of the automotive world. Build an ambulance, a box truck, a camper, or even a small bus. And while the chassis may be a living fossil, the 7.3-liter V8 debuted just a few years ago. Dubbed Godzilla, it's a pushrod design with an iron block and aluminum heads. It makes as much as 430 horsepower in the F-Series Super Duty and will take an F350 to 60 in 7.5 seconds. But in the E-Series, it's a low-stress 325 horsepower tuned to meet federal emission rules for heavy-duty trucks. As a result, horsepower and torque peak together at 3750 RPM. Loaded up, it burned a gallon of 87 octane every 10 miles. Engine tuners are embracing the Godzilla V8 since it doesn't take much to wake it up. Promises of 6 and 700 or more horsepower are common. Granted, those are tuner claims, but let a big engine rev and it'll make big power. The pushrod setup is relatively compact compared to overhead cam engines, allowing crate versions to slip easily into Fox body Mustangs. Viewed through a modern lens, this is a simple machine. Call the engine back to basics, but you can't say that about the chassis because it didn't go back. It simply never left. The front and rear suspensions could be on display at the Henry Ford Museum, yet it gets the job done. A safe arrival and no valuables harmed. Any vehicle that can do that deserves some love. Now for the upfront section. Wired in parallel. Electric motors and combustion engines are packaged differently, but for some companies, shared platforms still make the most business sense. When Maserati unveiled its handsome second-generation Gran Turismo coupe, our initial response was a bit muted, even muddled. Is that new? We asked of the lovely but familiar design. This sense of confoundment grew when we discovered that the automaker would offer this exact vehicle. A long hood, short deck GT with a conventional profile in two disparate powertrain configurations. Buyers can tour grandly in a coupe with a twin-turbo V6 internal combustion engine, or an ICE, or in a battery electric vehicle, BEV, but you might not guess from the outside that the insides are different. Maserati design head Klaus Boos says a desire to maintain the traditional design and dynamic sensibilities for which the Trident brand is known dictated this move. We can keep the low silhouette of the car because we're not putting anything under the front seats, he says, of the decision regarding placement of electric components. Unlike many competitors that incorporate a height-raising battery pack in the floor, Maserati's uniquely shaped pack occupies the engine compartment, the transmission tunnel, and some space behind the rear seats. The arrangement isn't just for aesthetics. When you have the batteries underneath the seats all the way outboard, then the car tends to understeer because you have all these gravitational forces of the batteries. By keeping the battery central, you avoid these gravitational forces and you avoid understeer. Though the brand plans to go all electric by 2030 and will eventually introduce BEV-only designs, the dual powertrain offerings will continue through this decade. Maserati will electrify its Grisale SUV in the same fashion. Maserati isn't alone in this strategy. After introducing the widely styled i3 for 2014 and seemingly planning a rollout of separate electric vehicles from its i sub-brand, BMW has shifted course. While it still reserves the right to release the occasional one-off dedicated battery electric model, like the radically styled and bedazzled iX, its core plan is to continue to create vehicles, such as the 4 Series Grand Coupe and the 7 Series luxury sedan, that can accommodate a battery electric, a plug-in hybrid, or an internal combustion powertrain. The transformation to electrification, we believe, doesn't go from one day to the other. BMW's head of design, the brand wants to be sure customers are satisfied with both ICE and BEV offerings. For us, the one promise is that BMW driving character will always be highly dynamic. It doesn't matter if it's diesel or gas, it doesn't matter if it's a plug-in hybrid, it will be dynamic. And if it's electric, it will also be dynamic. This flexible strategy allows BMW to respond to shifting market needs and regulations by producing more or fewer of any powertrain according to demand. The winner will probably be the one who can adapt to this unpredictability, he says. Land Rover seems to be following a similar path. When it revealed the current gen Range Rover for 22, the company announced that this luxurious off-roader, along with 5 other members of the Land Rover family, would be offered with a traditional combustion engine as a plug-in hybrid or with an EV powertrain, though not all the electrified options have appeared in the US yet. Land Rover stablemate Jaguar, an early adopter of BEV technology with the 2019 I-Pace, is taking a different tack. It plans to transition to a fully electric lineup this decade, introducing a range of all-new electric products beginning with the upscale SUVs. Volvo too is going all in. The brand has ceased development of new internal combustion powertrains and is committed to fully electrification by 2030, replacing its existing models with battery electric versions. This process begins with the electric 2024 EX90, which will eventually replace the XC90. Volvo has never been a manufacturer known predominantly for engines, says Owen Rady, the company's head of strategic and brand design. This positions us well for this transition. Perhaps more surprisingly, Cadillac has also taken this route. It announced that the recently revised Escalade is the last ICE vehicle line. Moving forward, all future Caddies will be electric, like the just-released Lyriq SUV and Celestiq flagship sedan. Luxury juggernaut Mercedes is taking a different road during this transitional decade, or rather 2 roads. Alongside its extensive range of ICE models, Benz is developing a full lineup of parallel BEVs. The S-Class and E-Class sedans have electric doppelgangers in the EQS and EQE sedans, but those are built on their own platform. Purpose architecture deserves a purpose, says Robert Lesnick, the brand's head of exterior design, speaking of the differentiation between the traditional 3-box configuration of Benz's traditional cars and the arching bow shape of its electric ones. That means from the outside, you are able to see that this is not just a conventional or known car. Mass market brands such as Honda and Kia are following a similar tactic. Honda plans for its electrified mid-side Prologue SUV and small affordable EVs, all jointly developed with GM, coexist with the Pilot and Civic. Kia introduced the electric 2-row EV6 and 3-row EV9, along with the similar Seltos and Telluride. Both brands may continue producing vehicles with tailpipes beyond 2030. For Mercedes, the parallel track will last only through the 2020s or one vehicle generation, after which the brand plans to shift to an entirely electric lineup. Like a zipper on your jacket, when you open it up, the 2 sides spread. And by the end of the decade, the life cycle of one car, everything will be electric and the zipper comes together again. Working double time, many manufacturers are offering both internal combustion and electric models in almost but not quite identical vehicles. The BMW 4 Series Grand Coupe and i4, the 7 Series and i7, the Ford F-150 and the F-150 Lightning, Transit and e-Transit, Genesis G80 and the electrified G80, Genesis GV70 and the electrified GV70, Hyundai Kona and the Kona Electric, the Kia Niro and the Niro EV, Land Rover Range Rover and the Range Rover EV, Maserati Gran Turismo and Gran Turismo Folgore, Grecale and Grecale Folgore, the Mercedes-Benz GLB 250 and the EQB 250 Plus, and the Sprinter and e-Sprinter, Mini Cooper and Cooper Electric, the Ram ProMaster and the ProMaster EV, and the Volvo XC40 and the XC40 Recharge. Hard to handle. Press, lift, pop out, pull, twist, push. Automotive entry is getting complicated. It's time for another episode of They Can But Should They? Today we're pointing our questions at the entry point to the automobile, the door handle. That's if we can find it. These days, drivers might use buttons, levers, pull tabs, touch-activated pads, proximity sensors, or even facial recognition to open the door. Aerodynamic and drag-reducing requirements have brought the automotive world to a point where the door handle, the first place we interact with the car, has become high-tech and occasionally highly confusing. Sure, there are wind cheating and weight considerations in handle design. Flush handles reduce drag compared to your old-fashioned grab bar. But much of the driving force behind the new looks is just that, looks. Designers believe consumers want sleeker, techy ingress, particularly for EVs, with their focus on being new and different. Here are some of the stranger implementations on the market today. Bump in the dark. Exotic cars have used tricky door handles as sort of a secret handshake for decades. If you can't find the button hidden in the window slats on the Lamborghini Miura, you can't go for a ride. Older McLarens bury their treasure deeper, but the Artura adds a molded handle to the door. Grope around beneath the ridges and vents of the bodywork until you hit the release and you're granted access. Keep up a conversation while you do it so nobody realizes you don't know how hard it is to get into your own car. Flush. Mercedes once touted door handles as a safety feature that allowed rescuers to pull open doors more easily. Apparently, it has decided first responders can manage with the modern version found on the S-Class. The new handle tucks itself inside the door when locked and pops out for access. The G-Class, on the other hand, uses essentially the same button handle combo it's had for more than 3 decades. Hidden entry. Ford's Mustang Mach-E places a capacitive door release button on the black B-pillar above the tiny pole. It's the Where's Waldo of ingress. The Chevy Corvette goes one step further, tucking a release button beneath the sharply sculpted bodywork at the edge of the door. Insensitive. Touch-sensitive door handles sound futuristic, but if you've ever stood in a public bathroom, pathetically waving your wet hands under a paper towel dispenser, you know that touch and motion sensors often fail at recognition. Perhaps because of compliments about frozen or unresponsive sensors on the Tesla Model S, the Model Y gets flush lever releases. Push me, pull you. To keep a smooth slide, many designers have tuned to a single lever that pops out with a push or remotely. The 90s Fiat Barchetta featured this design, and Aston Martin, Lexus, Nissan, Tesla, Kia, and Hyundai use various variations. It looks elegant while locked, but can be hard to operate with one hand, especially if you're a lefty. NASCAR takes on Le Mans. A modified Cup Series car will run in the Garage 56 entry for this year's 24-hour battle. Break out your American flag shirt and grab your passport because NASCAR is headed to France for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The crossover isn't as strange as it might seem. American sports car teams have long been vying for glory on the Mulsanne Straight at the famed endurance race, but NASCAR has only been to Le Mans once before. Each year, the Automobile Club de Aoste, ACO, welcomes a team to Le Mans to participate in Garage 56 program, an exhibition class created in 2012 to encourage technical innovation. Past G56 racers have run on alternative fuels or featured cockpits equipped for disabled drivers, with 2 teams from the latter category being the only G56 entries to have ever finished the race. For 2023, the ACO invited NASCAR to compete in the Garage 56 spot to bring the rowdy V8 NASCAR experience to Europe. Even though NASCAR runs road courses, endurance racing has different rules and challenges, so it's not as simple as just shipping over a Cup Series car. NASCAR chose Hendrick Motorsports, the most successful team in NASCAR's Premier Class, to go to France. This year's G56 entry will be a Camaro ZL1 Cup car, modified for the long hours and difficult racing conditions at Le Mans. We had to adapt to make it an endurance vehicle, says Brandon Thomas, VP of Vehicle Design, but it's a Cup car in spirit. A notorious 56. Nissan campaigned the odd-looking Delta Wing in 2012, G56 inaugural year. A study in aerodynamics and weight reduction, the oddly shaped, narrow front-track wingless design, nearly all downforce came from its diffuser, could run while sipping a fraction of the fuel and using fewer tires. It weighed just over 1,000 pounds and successfully hit the pace the ACO requested between prototype and GT racers. It retired on lap 76 after making contact with the barrier, but that was after it made good on its goal and returned 8.8 miles per gallon at race pace. That'd just be as shocking as a production car getting 100 miles per gallon. Bicentennial Party. In 1976, with gas prices high and track attendance low, the ACO invited NASCAR to send over a couple of his big V8 powered cars to battle with Porsches and prototypes at Le Mans. A Dodge Charger and a Ford Torino made the journey, but neither survived the 24 hours. So for the car itself, restore the roar. Chevy's naturally aspirated 5.9-liter V8 gets minor valve train and piston changes to increase the durability. Output is unrestricted at around 670 horsepower, and a revised cooling system lowers running temperature in hopes of keeping the V8 going for 24 hours. Mr. Brightside. Stock cars race on lighted tracks, so stickers replace the actual headlights. To put in real headlights required modifications inside the nose and tail to make room for wiring and additional cooling vents. The unique length control arms are similar to a standard Cup car's 4-way adjustable Öhlins dampers, feature external bump stops instead of internal travel limiters, and weigh 2 pounds less. The redesigned suspension uprights allow more airflow to the brakes, which are no longer iron discs but carbon rotors with titanium hats. Ceramic wheel bearings shed weight and reduce rolling resistance. It might look like a standard Cup car, but extensive use of carbon Kevlar weave reduces its mass by some 240 pounds for a 2960-pound total. Along with the road course Cup Spec wiper, the G56 car gets a heated windshield to prevent fogging since the cockpit isn't sealed. The G56 car retains the left side window net, making driver changes a gymnastic performance. If we do put doors on, Thomas says, then we lose some of the stock car relevance. Instead of a shift lever, the 5-speed transaxle is operated via paddles, reducing the physical toll on the driver. A backlight in the interior illuminates the seatbelt and buttons on the dash to help speed pit stops. Rear window. A Bosch radar system alerts the drivers to faster cars approaching from behind. A meter shows the distance and changes color based on the speed differential of the approaching car. Le Mans mandates a telemetry system that logs data and transmits it to race officials. Safety regulations required Hendrick Motorsports to mount the fuel tank, normally in the rear of a Cup car, amidships in a horseshoe configuration around the gearbox and encased in carbon fiber. The tank holds 32 gallons, 12 more than a Cup car. Le Mans spec drive planes, a taller rear spoiler, a bespoke carbon fiber splitter, and rear diffuser generate twice as much downforce as the Cup car's intermediate aero configuration, one of 4 used in the series. Goodyear developed special Eagle Race rubber for Le Mans. In dry conditions, it's a staggered 365 with section width up front and 380 in the rear. In the event of wet weather, the G56 car will ride on square, 365 wide setup, as the Cup car does in all conditions. Pachyderm proof package. You might not think you need to prep your vehicle for animal violence, but when the elephant traffic complicates your commute, priorities change. Bob Poole is an Emmy-winning award filmmaker. His sister, Joyce, is one of the world's leading authorities on African pachyderm behavior. In the Poole's 2012 documentary, War Elephants, the siblings visit Mozambique's Gorongosa National Park, once home to a thriving wild elephant population, now decimated by civil war and poaching. The elephants remain in the park are often wary and even violent towards humans. The Pooles recorded their interactions with the herds in hopes of helping the elephants while highlighting the importance of animal conservation. To do this, they needed a vehicle that could get them across the wild terrain and stand up to an aggressive elephant, just in case diplomacy failed. Joyce and I concocted this crazy idea not to run away when the elephants were charging and just try to calm them down. So he built a steel exoskeleton for his Land Rover Defender 110. I thought it would at least give us some protection if we were wrong and the elephant tried to kill us, he said. And ultimately, that happened, and it definitely saved my life. Along with protecting the endoskeletal filmmakers inside the Land Rover, Poole's custom cage can serve as the mount for all manner of cameras. With it, the Defender became a mobile video rig that opened fantastic new opportunities for capturing animal antics. A homemade heavy-duty spring-loaded camera arm with a gimbal on the end protects delicate equipment during off-roading. A pair of hydraulic jacks can quickly move the right side camera to the ground and back up again for a fast getaway. A gimbal at the front steadies a third camera, giving Poole's crew the capacity to shoot wide-angle, medium, and close-up footage simultaneously from one vantage point. The driver can remotely move a camera forward and backward. A rally car builder in Nairobi, Kenya helped with the modifications. Creature features. Rat racers. Scientists at the University of Richmond made tiny plastic bubble cars for rats and found that the cruising rodents were less stressed than their cage-bound lab buddies. Sedona Safari. Kia's 2015 SEMA entry, the Photo Safari Sedona, features an open roof and is full of photo editing equipment, so there's no need to step off the savannah to upload sweet shots to Instagram. Polar protection. Researchers in the polar bear hotspot of Churchill, Manitoba, let the fearless predators keep their cool and their distance by observing them from an enormous 4x4 Tundra buggy, specially built by a local touring company. Thought pursuit. Why do police departments limit themselves to big SUVs and Dodge Chargers? I asked cops to ponder some unconventional alternatives. Where I live, the police drive some heavy-duty machinery. There's the odd Ford Taurus hanging in there, but mainly it's Chevy Tahoes, Dodge Durangos, and Ford Explorers, with a healthy smattering of V8 Dodge Chargers. One day, while I was daydreaming about municipal budgets, as I want to do, I wondered, would cops drive something smaller and more efficient if they got to share in the savings from a lower purchase price? And if so, what would that number need to be? If I were a cop, I'd think $1,000 could persuade me to drive an escape patrol car, but I am not a cop. I had to turn in my badge because I play by nobody's rules but my own, so I asked some police to join me in this thought experiment. The first thing I learned is that everybody misses the Ford Crown Victoria. The second is that police chases are still way more common than I thought, and thus top speed is actually relevant. One sheriff deputy told me, I drive a police package Durango governed to 132, and I just chased a Ford F-250 diesel that, speed-wise, straight smashed everything we had. So we need something that can both take a hit to the body and pass on the straights to set up rolling blocks and get ahead to block intersections. To answer your obvious follow-up question, yes, I live in Hazard County. But even if you put a premium on speed, cops do a lot better than the Durango, and for less money. My town budget's $58,000 per police car and is buying another 4 this year. A Ford Escape ST Line Select costs $35,535. Figure $5,000 for lights and graphics, and the town could save almost $66,000 on those 4 vehicles. Divided up, that's almost $2,000 per cop on the payroll, and the taxpayers would fuel cars that get 26 miles per gallon instead of a Tahoe's 17 or an Explorer's 20. As for speed, the Escape with the 250 horsepower 2-liter engine can hit 60 in 5.7 seconds. Asked what the Escape's ungoverned top speed might be, our tech team said about 150, possibly 155. Maybe you wouldn't want to set up a roadblock with an Escape, but I wouldn't want to stare down an oncoming F-250 from behind the wheel of a Durango either. So clearly, I am a genius, and everybody should love this plan, but I have to admit that the fuel savings aren't as dramatic as I'd hoped. Gaining even 10 miles per gallon doesn't make much difference in a municipal budget. But how about buying no fuel at all? Now we're talking. Would police ever embrace electric patrol cars, though? To find out, I had another local cop drive an EV. And to stack the deck in my favor, it was a 576 horsepower Kia EV6 GT. This particular officer had a deep automotive background, including karting, and he owns a Camaro SS. He'd never driven an EV. His first reaction, this is unbelievably smooth and quiet. If you're in a car for a few hours every day, an EV offers a more serene work environment. On the taxpayer saving side, there are no oil changes or engine air filters, and brakes should last significantly longer thanks to regen. For our local department, an average day means driving 100 miles, so range and charge times likely aren't an issue. Oh, and for speed, he pulls to a stop and presses the GT button on the Kia's steering wheel. We're doing 60 practically before either of us can even remark on how quickly that happened. Heavy and solid, powerful, great to drive all day. It turns out EVs make inherently good police cars. So never mind the Escape. Ford has unveiled the F-150 Lightning Pro SSV, the modern Crown Vic Police Interceptor. Lightnings are big, quick, and comfortable. And most important for the rest of us, they have really distinctive headlights. The woman who disturbs. Michelle Mouton shook up the motorsport scene. She doesn't like to talk about her past, but that's because she's busy working to change the future. I first learned about Michelle Mouton when I was in my early 20s, just about the same age she was when she first got in a race car in 1973, the inaugural year of the World Rally Championship. The race was the famously difficult Monte Carlo Rally, and Mouton was navigating for a friend. She said she had no idea what she was getting into. When he first asked me if I wanted to co-drive for rally, I said, "What's rally?" I was working at a motorcycle shop and had also never heard of rally racing. One of the mechanics told me I looked like that French lady driver. I didn't, but I did wear my dark hair and long braids and had a habit of glaring at people. So close enough. I looked her up. A few vintage rallying films later, I was smitten with both Mouton and the insanity of rally events in the 1980s. The races were lawless, the cars experimental. It was an era of racing so dangerous that there's a documentary about it called Rallying, The Killer Years. Mouton was a killer too, ferocious behind the wheel of a Group B Audi Quattro, nicknamed the Black Volcano, and La Femme Qui Derange. She won races with her co-driver Fabrizia Pons at a time and in a discipline that didn't have any women at this top level, and hasn't since. Mouton would be annoyed by my saying she was the only woman. In fact, she corrected me during a panel discussion at Dirtfish Rally School. I was not the first woman to race rallies, she said. Back then, it was the opposite of now. Many women in rally, not so many in road racing. But you were the first to win, another journalist said, as I pointed out that Mouton has also done road racing. Winning her class at the 1975 24 Hours of Le Mans, Mouton shrugged and gave a half smile. She's very modest. If I were Mouton, I'd tell everyone I almost won the Group B championship. She should have. She went into the penultimate race of 1982 trailing Walter Roll by only 7 points. The morning of the first stage, she learned her father had died. Her mother told her to race anyway, but she did, building a lead of more than an hour over Roll. If not for a muffed gearbox change, Mouton would have gone into the last race of the season with the championship in hand. She would win again, but never would she and Pons be in the championship hunt, as 1983 was her full last season in WRC. She never complains, but I will. It's impossible to win the championship when you aren't sent to the races. Even so, she continued to upset the regulars everywhere she did race. In 1984, she ran Pikes Peak, and in 85, she won it despite a hostile perception from the other drivers and numerous fines and penalties from the officials. To Mouton, the stories are relics, as cobwebby as the trophies she keeps in a cardboard box in her backyard shed. She's proud of having been the first woman to win a WRC rally, but she thinks it's a shame that she's still the only woman to have won WRC rally. She'd rather talk about her years as president of the FIA Women's and Motorsport Commission, where she worked on ways to get more women in racing, an effort she's still devoted to. Despite her reluctance to look back, Mouton did grace us with a few stories of the good old days, recounting how she and Pons would cook foil-wrapped sausages on the Audi Turbo during 2 or 3 runs, and they'd start to smell good. She also told us her first factory ride, the Fiat 131 Abarth. She was so hard to drive that her hands would blister and bleed, so co-driver Francois Concini would have to reach over and pull the wheel to help make the turns. Everyone asked how I could drive the Group B Audi. Such a difficult car, she said, laughing. It's easy compared to the Fiat. It has power steering. Strong Medicine, the 2023 BMW M2. Each dose contains 453 horsepower. May cause dizziness. Do not drink alcohol before using. Drive daily or as needed. By Mike Sutton. Do you struggle to make sense of today's influx of heavy, absurdly powerful EVs? Does trying to discern one SUV body shape from another induce anxiety and depression? Then you may have suffered from transitional automotive disorder. Ask your BMW dealer if the new M2 Coupe is right for you. Side effects may include joyous laughter at extra legal speeds, increased tolerance for G-forces, and cravings for empty, curvy roads. The second-gen M2's formulation is simple in that it condenses the workings of the one-size-up M4, one of BMW M's finest, into a more playful package. At $63,195 to start, it's also $12,500 less expensive. Based on the redesigned 2 Series Coupe produced in Mexico, the M2 remains a compact, rear-wheel drive rush of a car with a confining back seat, though its wheelbase and overall length have increased by 2.1 and 4.1 inches to 108.1 and 180.3 inches respectively. It's also now a little shorter in stature, yet 1.3 inches broader in beam, with wider front and rear tracks that now match the M4's. While the ductwork on the M2's stylized bumpers appear disjointed from certain angles, prominently flared fenders lend this upright 3-box coupe the swagger of a vintage IMSA racer. Thankfully, its larger sibling's controversial bucktooth maw is not included. The M2 is strictly rear-wheel drive car, but BMW otherwise incorporates virtually all of the M4's and mechanically identical M3 sedans' other major bits into the M2, including its twin-turbo 3-liter inline-six. In this application, BMW's S58 mill generates a stout 453 horsepower, 20 horses less than what it makes in the standard M4, but 48 more than the outgoing M2 competition's S55 inline-six produced. It's a stronger dosage than even the limited edition 444 horsepower M2 CS provided. A 6-speed manual remains standard, with the no-cost automatic option being a ZF-sourced 8-speed in place of the previous 7-speed dual-clutch unit. The EPA pegs both setups at 19 combined, roughly the same as the previous gen M2 competition. Not that we need extra incentive to select the DIY gearbox, but according to the EPA, it'll take the M2 a mile further per gallon on the highway. From the engine's melodious race toward the 7,200 RPM redline to the velvety growl it emits through its quad tailpipes, it's business as usual for this excellent straight six. The main difference is that while the M2 makes the same 406 pound-feet of torque at the same 2650 RPM as the M4's headier tune, its thrust builds more progressively as revs increase. With slightly less turbo boost to manage, 17.4 psi versus the base M4's 18.9, it's easier to feed in the power without upsetting the car's hold on the road. Paired with the manual transmission's precise, if somewhat rubbery shifter and a set of tightly spaced pedals, this is one of BMW's most potent treatments for driving boredom. The M2's stiffened body shell houses the M4's rear axle with its electronically controlled limited slip differential, as well as that car's suspension links, adaptive dampers, and brakes, 15-inch iron rotors in front and 14.6-inch units out back. Minor tuning changes, such as springs that are slightly firmer in the front and softer in the back, help temper the M2's willingness to rotate on a wheelbase that's 4.4 inches shorter than the big brothers. But even the M4's 19-inch front and 20-inch rear Michelin Pilot Sport 4S summer tires carry over. We recorded a heady 1.03 Gs of grip on the skid pad, along with tidy stopping distances from 70 and 154 feet and 100 miles an hour and 302 feet. Carbon ceramic brakes aren't on the menu, but track-oriented Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires are, and a lighter carbon fiber roof, as seen here, is also available. BMW's curved display, consisting of a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster and a 14.9-inch center touchscreen, dominates the business casual interior and incorporates many of the climate controls that previously had separate buttons and switches. Despite the additional width and ample legroom up front, you still wear this car more than sit in it, especially if you opt for the $9,900 carbon package and its hard-shell M-carbon bucket seats. Though ultra-supportive and good for a claimed 24-pound weight savings, their firm padding and lack of lumbar adjustment punish our lower backs. Stick with the softer standard sport seats with still generous side bolsters that hold snugly. They're far more agreeable. Recommendations for navigating the M2's numerous drive settings include activating either the general sport or track modes. There's the default road setting, which provides a simplified gauge display that's easier to read at speed. A stiff ride is mostly mitigated by selecting the softest suspension mode, which provides enough compliance not to feel brutally harsh on most surfaces. We also deactivated the manual's rev matching feature, set the steering response to comfort, sport increases effort but not tactility, and left the brake pedal feel alone. We couldn't discern the difference between modes. The M4's drift analyzer is present for scoring your slides around a racetrack, but track-bound drivers will find the updated stability control system with 10 stages of traction control intervention more useful. Unfortunately, the M2's changes bring an additional 184 pounds of mass compared with the old competition model. 3745-pound test car weighed more than an M4 equipped with a manual transmission and carbon ceramic brakes, and it was 0.1 seconds slower to 60 than the M4 or old M2 comp, posting a 3.9 second time. In terms of top gear acceleration from 30 and 50, where engine responsiveness is key, the gap between the M2 and its predecessor is even more pronounced. Only at triple-digit speeds does the new car flex its stronger legs. While its 12.2-second quarter-mile pass may just be a tenth quicker than before, its 118 miles an hour trap speed is 4 miles an hour faster. The automatic version we tested was unsurprisingly quicker, sprinting to 60 in 3.5 seconds, and covering the quarter mile in 11.7 seconds at 122 miles an hour, running wheel-to-wheel with the 503 horsepower M3 competition. The M2 works best as a stimulant for the narrow pathways linked to pleasure and fine motor control, as well as the mid-range power allow for careful attitude adjustments with the throttle as the car squirms over undulating pavement. Turn-in response is crisp as the chassis nearly orients itself over mid-corner bumps, subtly telegraphing load transfer to your backside. Given that it shares the M4's variable steering hardware, its chunky helm remains lighter on feel than, say, a Porsche's 718's. But its overall compartment and accuracy make this Bavarian muscle coupe a more pleasurable performance remedy. Science has yet to find a cure for transitional automotive disorder, as it spreads naturally in the open market, spurred on by environmental and societal factors. But thanks in large part to its bountiful raid on BMW's parts bin, the new M2 offers powerful relief. Pluses are an awesome twin-turbo 6, feisty rear-wheel drive attitude, greater overall refinement. Minus, heavier than before, funky bumper treatments, still cramped backseat equals strong medicine for the driver's soul. Counterpoints. BMW missed the mark. The previous F87 Gen M2 had a personality all its own while still feeling like a member of the M family. This new G87 M2 is just an M4 in a different wrapper, and if you don't like the M4's nostrils, I doubt this cubism meets machine design will excite you. The M2 performs admirably, is plenty capable, and I'm sure it'll put down impressive lap times, but I'm old enough to remember when M cars did more than just generate numbers. They felt the fastest without actually being the fastest. The previous M2 had that magic and will be missed. Also, ditch the massive touchscreen. It's a distraction in what's supposed to be a driver-focused car. Casey Colwell. The M2 resembles a kid in a puffer jacket. Its wheels, lights, and vents are sunk deep in the bodywork. A choice intended to read as muscular, but which comes off more like an allergic reaction. But the M2 doesn't feel dull by the Benadryl. Alert and enthusiastic, it boosts your confidence on curvy roads and greets each downshift with a cheery roar. This kid should be your first pick for the team. It's ready to play. Elena Scher. Hyundai's Ioniq 6 goes the distance. Motor west on historic Route 66. Route 66 ain't what it used to be. The mother road has long been bypassed by the interstate highway system, and most of its once numerous roadside motels, gas stations, and eateries have vanished beneath the blades of bulldozers. Those that remain generally fall into one of two categories: graffiti-slathered skeletons of their former selves that live on an Instagram infamy, or Route 66 memorabilia outfits sell tchotchkes and supplies to infrequent passerby. But the road still has a lot of appeal, especially the more desolate stretches that wander far from the interstate. Through lonely yet beautiful lands, they convey a sense of time traveled. These are places where you can see the weather advancing across the countryside as you drive down into the valley to meet it. There are few people out here and even fewer services, making it an interesting environment to take the new Hyundai Ioniq 6 electric sedan off leash on a road trip. The sleek Ioniq 6 sedan shares much with the Ioniq 5 SUV. Both ride on Hyundai's acclaimed eGMP platform with an available long-range battery pack that stores 77.4 kilowatt hours of electricity. The Ioniq 6 is available in rear-wheel drive with rear-mounted motor that provides 225 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, or all-wheel drive with an added front motor that bumps total output to 320 horses and 446 pound-feet. Curiously, Hyundai claims both Ioniqs weigh nearly the same, with the SUV's gross vehicle weight rating exceeding the sedan's by just 44 pounds in long-range spec. That they look radically different is self-evident, but there's much to glean from the details. The sedan is 8.6 inches longer than the SUV, while its roofline is 4.1 inches lower. At 0.22, its coefficient of drag betters the cubist SUVs by 23.6%. Combine this with its tidier frontal area, and we estimate the Ioniq 6 enjoys 30% reduction in aerodynamic drag force. This pays off when it comes to EPA ratings, as our rear-drive SE long-range test car, a $46,825 machine, is good for a whopping 361-mile range and 140 mpge combined. Meanwhile, the same best-case configuration of the boxier Ioniq 5 is rated at 303 miles and 114 mpge combined. On the competitor front, the single-motor front-drive Polestar 2 sedan is pegged for 270 miles of range and 107 mpge combined, rising to a Polestar estimated 300 miles and switching to rear drive for 2024, while a rear drive Tesla Model 3 does 272 miles and 132 mpge. This massive difference gave us the confidence to wander far off the interstate. Following all the weather-beaten Route 66 fragments we could stitch into an itinerary from Arizona to California. In theory, the Ioniq's competitors could manage this, albeit with more uncertainty. The old road crosses and recrosses Interstate 40 like an endless braided river, with Electrify America DC fast charge stations setting at several of these nodes. Options along our route read as if the station planners were guided by the song lyrics: Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, Kingman, Barstow, San Bernardino. Electrify America added stations in Williams, Needles, Fenner, and Hesperia for good measure, even though these burgs escaped the notice of songwriter Bobby Troup. Our trip began in Phoenix, and the portion that followed Route 66 spanned 381 miles from Flagstaff to Barstow, where we'd leave the highway that's the best, to keep an appointment at the test track. There was an initial uphill pull to Flagstaff, and then we persevered to Williams to avoid heavy overnight snow. The Williams fast charge station occupied our hotel's parking lot, so we took advantage. From there, we covered the remaining 342-mile remainder to Barstow, with a brief 24-minute stop in Fenner, California. We could have pressed on to our off-piste overnight in Mojave, but hunger got the best of us, and restaurants surround the station in Barstow. Through it all, the Ioniq 6 proved to be a sublimely capable road trip machine, winding in the miles with self-assured competence. Aided by an extra bit of sidewall thanks to the SE's 18-inch Hankook, the suspension glides over neglected, alligator-cracked 2-lane pavement that fell off the highway department's priority list decades ago. The steering holds up its end of the bargain, imparting a confident sense of straight ahead, unfettered by crosswinds and scalloped road edges. In the twistier sections, effort builds progressively as the car bends willingly into corners, a precursor to the decent 0.86 G of grip we measured at the track despite narrow 225mm all-season rubber. Our single-motor powertrain's 225 horsepower isn't terribly athletic, but the absence of all-wheel drive keeps the weight down to 4225 pounds. This also gives our rear-drive Ioniq 6 a slight rearward weight bias, 46.7 front, 53.3% rear, which puts the power to the ground much more gracefully than the single-motor Polestar 2's front-drive setup. At the track, the Ioniq 6 6.2 second dash to 60 handily beat the Hyundai's own estimate, while its ready torque and direct drive gearbox make quick work of passing maneuvers. Ramps of 2.5 seconds from 30 to 50 and 3.2 from 50 to 70 compare favorably with results from the last BMW 540i xDrive we tested. Its wheelbase is 2 inches shorter than the Ioniq 5's, but the sedan's front seat offers far more spacious environment. We're smitten with the bi-level console and its huge basement, and we don't mind the window switches that lock button mounted there because this enables full-length floating armrests on nearly naked door panels, allowing one to grasp anywhere to pull the door shut. The displays and controls are more attractive and intuitive than the Ioniq 5 or its Kia and Genesis counterparts, and they blow away the barren Model 3. The Streamliner's arcing roof does impinge on rear headroom somewhat, but noggin space is still competitive. Besides, there's plenty of room to sprawl out because of the rear cabin's breadth and abundant legroom. At a glance, the entry-level SE is not immediately apparent what you're missing by not stepping up to the SEL or Limited. Sure, the seats are cloth, but they are seamlessly supportive and heated up front. The steering column isn't power adjustable, but it tilts and telescopes. Phone mirroring and charging aren't wireless, but USB ports and places to stash your device abound. Driver assistant features seemingly went for little, with adaptive cruise control that's tied into adjustable regenerative braking and Hyundai's own performing lane centering system both present. As good as the Ioniq 6 is, it's not perfect. The trunk's 11 cubic foot capacity is weak. The headlights don't have much reach on a dark deserted highway. Also, we managed just 260 miles on our 75 mile per hour range test, which says more about EPA ratings than anything else. The Fed's 361 mile estimate combines city and highway test cycles in a 55-45 split, and the highway portion is not the steady cruise you might imagine. Our test details a road trip number, and 260 miles is still a lot where bladders and appetites are concerned. On a back road tour like this, you'll likely take your time and fare better with range. After all, if you drive too fast, you'll be unable to read the Burma shave signs as you pass. The pluses: cruises with the best of them, attractive and spacious interior. You won't spend a lot of downtime charging. Minus: trunk can't carry much Route 66 swag. Rated range overly optimistic, not terribly quick without all-wheel drive. Equals: who needs a Tesla Model 3 when this exists? Counterpoint: there's real polish here, both in the confident way the Ioniq 6 goes down the road and in the design flourishes that combines form and function in innovative ways. The 4 dots on the steering wheel reference Morse code for age and also serve as state of charge indicators while the car is plugged in. Silly, but not pointless. We'll take that over Elon's fart mode any day. Joey Caparella. Could the ascendance of EVs be what finally derails the trend of ever larger wheels? The Hyundai Ioniq 6 shows why it might. When equipped with the 77.4 kilowatt battery pack, the single motor version sees its headline making 361 mile EPA range drop precipitously to 305 miles the moment buyers upgrade from 18-inch wheels to 20s. Making the same change on the dual motor Ioniq 6 results in a 46 mile loss. With EV buyers prioritizing range, understandable given the still shaky charging infrastructure, high-style, oversized wheels suddenly lose some luster. Fortunately, the Ioniq 6 still has style to spare, even on 18s. Joe L'Oreal. The Chevy Bolt EV and the Volkswagen Jetta Sport ask, what's it gonna be? Gas or EV? We humans aren't keen on being told how to live our lives. We like to do what we want when we want, and that's what the automobile has provided since its early days, the ability to travel freely. Like so many car buyers, though, we feel the pressure to at least consider the purchase of a tailpipe-free automobile. Within the next decade, shoppers looking to buy a new or second-hand car will face quite possibly the toughest automotive choice of their lives, whether to go internal combustion or electric. Electric vehicles have become what peas and carrots are to infants, forced upon us and for some worthy of regurgitation. Many automakers have committed to going fully electric by 2030, even as the current charging infrastructure isn't ready. To determine whether an entry-level buyer should make the leap, we set off in 2 opposing budget price offerings, both on former 10 Best winning platforms, to sort this out. Most recent electric vehicles have rolled out like models in a fashion show, with glitz and glamour, dazzling light shows, massive screens, and rich prices. Not Chevy's Bolt. Since the car debuted in 2016, Chevy has moved nearly 200,000 of the gimmick-free hatchbacks. A battery update in 2020 increased its energy to an estimated 63 kilowatt hours of usable capacity, and for 2022, the Bolt received a styling makeover. But more important, and most unlikely in these inflationary times, the Bolt's price actually decreased. What's more, the recent gyrations of the Inflation Reduction Act mean that the Bolt is once again eligible for the maximum EV tax credit. With its $27,495 starting figure, the Bolt is already the cheapest EV and most shoppers will qualify for the $7,500 incentive. Though at that price, don't expect niceties such as power driver's seat, a heated steering wheel, heated front seats, adaptive cruise control, and inductive phone charging. Buyers can add those items optionally, but even in base form, the Bolt includes a 10.2-inch touchscreen, wireless phone mirroring, and a Wi-Fi hotspot. Adding to the Bolt's appeal, Chevy will pay to have a 240-volt outlet installed at the home of qualified buyers and even cover any permit costs. Refreshed for 2022, the $22,650 Volkswagen Jetta Sport is a basic no-frills sedan. Although the Jetta comes standard with a digital instrument cluster and a 6.5-inch touchscreen, you won't find automatic climate control, mirrored phone connections, require a cord, and drivers still need to insert and turn a key to fire the engine. As you might expect at this price point, there are plenty of cheap-feeling materials inside, yet what's there seems to be put together well. Volkswagen's MQB platform underpins the Jetta. It's the same foundation as the beloved GTI, so the Jetta is nice to drive. And wonder of wonders, it comes standard with a 6-speed manual gearbox. In an urban setting, the Bolt shines as an everyday commuter. Its compact size won't seat larger adults comfortably in the rear seat, but enables the Bolt to be street parked in tight spots. With the floor-mounted battery keeping the center of gravity low, the Bolt drives lighter than its 3597-pound curb weight might suggest. The increased sense of sure-footedness suggests better performance around the skid pad than the 0.79G from the 17-inch Michelin Energy Saver AS tires. Wheel motions are supremely damped over pop-marked concrete, and significant impacts are largely isolated. The Jetta Sport, on the other hand, rides a bit clumsier. Relative to the Bolt, the wheel motions aren't as subtle, and cratered surfaces generate more impact noise throughout the cabin. But that doesn't mean the Jetta is a bad driving machine. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The Jetta Sport remains composed when leaned on, and its 17-inch Nexene NFERA AU7 all seasons clung to the skid pad with an impressive 0.87G worth of stick. Put the Bolt into sport mode, switch off the traction control, and from a stoplight you can surprise bystanders by squeaking the front tires on the way to 60 miles an hour in 6.6 seconds. The quarter mile passes in 15.1 at 93 miles an hour, which is also the Bolt's top speed. But it's the power delivery that can induce a smirk. The instant arrival of the 266 pound-feet of torque excites the inner ear before all 200 horses trot onto the scene, giving the Bolt the ability to zip through traffic. While the Bolt generates effortless acceleration, the Jetta's 158 horsepower, turbocharged 1.5-liter inline-4 needs a little more convincing to produce meaningful forward movement. The 184 pound-feet of torque arrives at 1750 RPM, but it's easy to catch the turbo napping. Nevertheless, the Jetta enables a degree of driver engagement an electric vehicle will never provide. Work the light action of the clutch, manage wheel spin, and the Jetta beats the Bolt to 30 miles an hour, while 60 arrives in 7 seconds flat. Run the tack out to the 6500 RPM fuel cutoff and take time with the shifts, as this gearbox prefers not to be rushed, and the quarter mile appears in 15.5 seconds at 92 miles an hour. By contrast, interactions with the Bolt's powertrain begin and end with the steering wheel mounted regen paddle. When it comes to long distance travel, an EV requires strategic planning. You can refuel a gas engine on nearly any street corner, but a need for electrons will determine where you stop, what you eat, and where you rest your head. Our travels took us south to Dayton, Ohio, roughly 200 miles from our Ann Arbor's headquarters. The Bolt's 220 miles of range at 75 miles an hour is respectable from what you might see from EVs priced 2 or even 3 times as much. It's just enough to keep our range anxiety meter from redlining. But there's another variable to take into consideration: the weather. Initially, the Bolt's hush cabin and great forward visibility created a serene environment out on the open road. But then the skies went dark and heavy rain increased the friction coefficient between the tires and the wet road surface, causing the indicated range to drop at an alarming rate. This brought us face to face with the limited and frequently non-functional charging infrastructure, even along the well-traveled I-75 corridor between Detroit and Dayton. And when we entered at a 62.5 kilowatt charge point connection in Lima, Ohio, another problem presented itself: charger crowding. A Ford Mustang Mach-E occupied the single plug, and its driver had chosen to nap while the car charged. Do we wake him or wait our turn? The etiquette surrounding charging is too new to have obvious rules. When was the last time you questioned how to wait for a gas pump? Once connected, we discovered that the Bolt's biggest drawback is its 55 kilowatt peak DC fast charge capability. Unlike more costly EVs that can replenish electrons at rates many times higher, the Bolt's inability to utilize the highest powered DC connections means more time spent at the plug. With the Volkswagen, on the other hand, it's life as we know it. Since you're not seeking out your next plug, You stop when you want, eat where you want, and sleep where you want. And you won't make refueling stops often. The Jetta's 1.5-liter 4 is one of the most efficient gas engines to navigate our 75-mile-an-hour highway loop, returning 44 miles per gallon and uncorking the potential to travel 580 miles on a tank. When the Jetta's tank runs low, you simply pull into the next service station, spend at most a minute and a half pumping up to 13.2 gallons into the tank, and continue on your way. By contrast, the Bolt needs 84 minutes on a DC connection to recharge the battery from 10 to 90%. In that amount of time, you could pump 756 gallons, enough fuel to drive the Jetta 33,264 miles, or around the equator 1.3 times. We didn't go that far, but after hundreds of miles driving both cars, it's clear that each car attains its mission directed with grace. The difference between the Bolt and Jetta amounts to a lifestyle choice. For urban dwellers, particularly those who just want a seamless behind-the-wheel experience and can charge at home, the Bolt hits the nail on the head and just might be all the EV most people need. If distance driving is your thing, a little soul is something you value, and you live life more on your own terms, then the Jetta is the perfect package. We know what we'd choose. For the Volkswagen Jetta Sport, the plus is great gas mileage, genuine driver involvement. It even offers a manual. The minus, ride quality could be better. The 1.5-liter can be sleepy, plastic, fantastic interior. Equals an old school freedom, mobility, and engagement at an econo car price. The Chevy Bolt EV Plus, punchy acceleration, decent range, tax credit pushes the effective base price below $20,000. Minus, torpid recharging speed, small backseat, interacting with today's wretched charging infrastructure. Equals a relatively painless step into the future for those who stay close to home. Green is good. BMW's newly conservative approach to engineering EVs turns out a sedan that eclipses Benz's purpose-built electric flagship. Given BMW's trajectory, it's only logical that the brand's latest flagship is a 3-ton behemoth with a movie theater screen and a hands-free driving mode. But we're not wringing our hands over this couchification because the 7 Series doesn't claim to be a sports sedan. Plus, if you want a sporty BMW, you can still get an M2. The 7 Series is the Bavarian's Mercedes S-Class fighter, and it has often struggled to find footing against its rival, which has come to define the term flagship sedan. Could battery propulsion offer the opportunity to turn the tide? The two automakers' divergent approaches to EVs have already shifted traditional roles. Mercedes, typically sober and conservative, has gone all science fiction with its standalone EQ blob-shaped electric models. BMW, meanwhile, after retiring the carbon fiber intensive i3 and i8, appears to be moving away from the strategy of giving EVs dedicated platforms. So, the battery-powered i7 shares its body, underpinnings, and platform with the latest generation gas-powered 7 Series. While the spaceship-like Mercedes EQS hatchback never stops reminding you that you're motoring on electrons, the i7 conventional 3-box sedan shape is innocuously familiar. That's not to say inconspicuous. The blunt front end incorporates enough important styling elements to make the old Bango designed 7 Series look conservative. Bizarre split headlights and a massive kidney grille combined with a slab-sided profile and slim taillights for a less than cohesive look. Still, our test car garnered lots of looks, especially in its optional $5,000 matte gray paint, and you can't deny the i7's Rolls-Royce caliber presence. It's sized like a Rolls too. This 7 Series is considerably larger than before, with an overall length of 212.1 inches exceeding both the S-Class and the EQS by several inches. Fun fact, it's the exact same height as the first generation BMW X1 SUV. The 101.7 kilowatt battery pack under the floor contributes to a significant portion of the i7's prodigious 6,067 pound weight. A 650 horsepower M70 is coming soon, but for now, the sole model is the xDrive 60, in which a 255 horsepower front motor and a 308 horsepower rear motor combine for 536 peak horsepower. For a car like this, an electric powertrain makes a lot of sense because it's ultra smooth and supremely quiet. The i7 is especially so, providing a strong, seamless shove as it pushes the sedan to 60 miles an hour in 4.1 seconds. We measured a tone-like 60 decibels at a 70 mile an hour cruise. The equivalent Mercedes, the 516 horsepower EQS 580, was quicker, with a 3.7 second run to 60, no doubt aided by its 261 pound weight advantage. And yet, the i7 hides its heft well, furthering our suspicion that BMW has reassigned its best chassis engineers to work on EVs. Composed and imperturbable, the i7 wafts along without floating. It inspires confidence when pointed straight ahead, but the steering lacks feel when you change direction. Wheel control is impressive, body motions are well damped, and ride quality is impeccable. Riding on Pirelli P0, PZ4 summer tires and optional 21-inch wheels, the i7 also outperformed the EQS at our track by significant margins, with a strong skid pad result of 0.93 Gs and a short, for 3 tons, 70-mile-an-hour stopping distance of 159 feet. We didn't use the brake pedal much on the street though, opting instead to shift into B, which enables one-pedal driving. The level of regen in D is also configurable, and there are numerous driving modes that adjust the air springs, adaptive dampers, and accelerator response. Some modes even automatically activate the massaging seats, open or close the sunroof shade, and change the interior displays and ambient lighting. BMW wants the i7's cabin to provide an immersive experience, and it's almost too successful. Theater mode deploys the 31.3-inch screen for the rear seat and raises the rear window shades to create a cocoon for watching Netflix. Unfortunately for the driver, the screen obscures the rearview mirror entirely, and there's no digital camera mirror available to help you see what's behind you. The $7,250 rear executive lounge seating package includes a reclining passenger's side rear seat with an ottoman function that shoves the seat in front of it all the way forward to serve as a footrest. A warning pops up in the central display, prompting the driver to ensure that the seat is not blocking the view of the side view mirror, but it's not immediately clear what to do to remedy the situation. Of course, there are many cameras and sensors to see for you, and the i7 is capable of hands-free driving on the highway under certain circumstances. The system works well, although the car occasionally wanders in the lane. But you won't be using hands-free for too many miles at a time. We measured a 75-mile-an-hour real-world range of 260 miles against an EPA estimate of 308 miles. That's significantly short of the EQS's 350-mile result in the same test. Credit the Benz's ultra-slippery 0.20 drag coefficient and larger battery pack, but there's often a give and take with EVs. And BMW fitting summer tires shows it's willing to take a range hit for the dynamic boost that more aggressive rubber provides. The i7's pricing is ambitious, starting at $120,295. Entry to the EQS is considerably less, with the base 329 horsepower rear-wheel drive EQS 450 Plus opening at $105,550, while the more comparable EQS 580 begins at $127,100. Our generously equipped i7 test car stickered for $156,595, well into AMG EQS territory, and it felt worth every penny. In what one might interpret as an admission of its lesser prestige, the gas-powered 7 Series is still less expensive than the S-Class, but a look at the electric matchup reveals the tables have turned. The pluses: quiet and confident underway, avant-garde interior materials, sumptuous rear seat. The minuses: less rear-world highway range than the competition, too many driver distractions, weighs more than a Ford F-150. It all equals an electric powertrain finally turns BMW's flagship sedan into a bona fide S-Class alternative. Little side note: adaptive, improvise, overcome. To give BMW the flexibility to shift production from gas to electric to satisfy buyer demands, and to save money developing a unique EV architecture, the 7 Series platform accommodates the electric, such as the i7 xDrive 60, and the 48-volt hybrid, the 740i, powertrains. Newly studied in matters unpaved, the Honda Pilot is now an ace, both on and off the road. When Honda birthed the Trail Sport moniker on the previous generation Pilot and Passport, it was an inauspicious moment. With the trim offering almost no functional upgrades, the automaker appeared to be cynically chasing the emerging popularity of rugged model line extensions. That changes with the all-new 2023 Pilot. The Trail Sport truly distinguishes itself from the rest of the lineup, with all-terrain tires and a matching full-size spare, an inch more ground clearance for 8.3 inches total, beefy skid plates, a slightly softer front anti-roll bar, and a torque vectoring rear diff with 20% more torque capacity. The off-road variant is now fully realized. Speaking of that rear diff, it's a vectoring madman, rotating the rear end around with slide-happy shenanigans on and off-road. Three-row large SUVs are never this natural. Three-row large SUVs are never this neutral, but the Pilot gets all 4 tires fully engaged to deliver 0.85 G on the skid pad. Astonishing, considering the lowly T-speed rated at 118 miles an hour, all-terrain rubber. The Continental Terrain Contact AT tires claw extremely well on soft sand and mud, but don't sling at highway speeds on pavement, despite their knobby tread. The Trail Sport does give up some on-road prowess relative to its siblings, with the tires and softer front anti-roll bar eroding some steering precision and allowing more body motion. The stopping distance from 70 miles an hour is the longest, 189 feet. While the Trail Sport isn't as sharp as the other Pilot models on pavement, most competitors aren't either. The Trail Sport has more serious off-road chops than its peers, but it's still no mountain goat. Even with the additional ground clearance, the Trail Sport's 19.8-degree approach angle means it can't quite clear the 20-degree ramp we used to test articulation, and any vehicle with this much wheelbase is at risk for high centering. Also, Honda incorporated the front tow hook into the forward skid plate under the oil pan, which means two things. It won't work as a flag mount, and you may need a snorkel to attach a snatch strap after getting stuck in a water hole. This 4th gen Pilot debuts a revised and fortified light truck architecture that will also underpin the next Odyssey minivan, Ridgeline pickup, and Passport SUV. Generally speaking, the Pilot has grown in every dimension. The Trail Sport specifically by 2.9 inches in wheelbase, 3.7 inches in length, and over an inch in track widths, which makes for more second and third row space plus greater cargo room. The third row is not just habitable, but comfortable for adults, with the seat cushion now about 2 inches higher off the floor for more stretched out space. It's not minivan grade, but it's not far off. Parents of young children will appreciate the buttons on the second row seats that tilt and slide them out of the way, making it easy for kids to self-embark for the back. Bigger and stiffer means heavier, and the Trail Sport's 4709-pound curb weight is a substantial 382 more than that of the last Pilot we tested. But the structure feels about as solid as a bridge about abatement, which benefits both ride and handling, and the Pilot steers with a lightness and veracity that belies its increased weight. There's more sound-deadening material to block out the outside world too. The $49,695 Trail Sport is the third highest trim level, below the $53,375 Elite and $200 less than the Touring. It's well equipped but missing a few of the top model's niceties, such as ventilated front seats, heated rear seats, Wi-Fi, and Bose audio. Visually, the 2023 Pilot marks a return towards boxy from the previous jelly bean shape, although it's not nearly as cubist as the 2nd gen model. Viewed from the side or the rear, the new Pilot blends in with its peers. Arguably, its most noticeable visual is the $455 diffused Sky Pearl paint available only on the Trail Sport. Interior materials are of reasonably high quality, and storage bins abound. Orange stitching on the seats and dash is a touch of dress-up, but our test vehicle's all-black color scheme is bland, and it's the only choice on the Trail Sport. We're never fans of fingerprint-attracting piano black trim, which unfortunately surrounds the shift buttons and climate controls. The 9-inch center touchscreen on EXL and higher models is small by today's standards. Honda's venerable 60-degree naturally aspirated V6 sprouts dual overhead cams for the first time, part of a comprehensive overhaul to reduce emissions. Displacement remains 3.5 liters, and a combination of more precise fuel control, higher injection pressures, and variable valve timing on both camshafts conspire to cut particulate and NOx emissions by up to 50%. That gets the V6 to super ultra low emissions vehicle 30 status, which should keep it emissions legal through the end of the decade. Peak power is up a nominal 5 horsepower to 285 total, and torque is unchanged at 262 pound-feet, with both peaks at slightly higher RPM. The V6 still has a pleasing intake honk, but Honda's storied VTEC is gone, and with it is a characterful high-lift cam switchover point and resulting pandemonium at the top of the tack. Power-to-weight math puts the new model 7% behind the previous one, so it's no surprise that acceleration is slower by similar margins, 6.9 seconds to 60 and 15.4 at 90 miles an hour in the quarter mile, versus 6.2 seconds and 14.8 at 94 miles an hour before. Fuel economy suffers too, with EPA combined ratings down 1 mile per gallon versus comparable 2022 Pilots. The Trail Sport lands at 20 miles per gallon, which is 1 mile per gallon worse than other all-wheel drive Pilots. Although this SUV lags behind its most efficient peers, some buyers will appreciate that Honda is sticking with the V6 rather than switching to a Turbo 4 like many competitors. Delivering all the expected practicality of a three-row midsize SUV, the new Pilot expands the breadth of its lineup with the off-road ready trail sport. Its driving dynamics now bring it to the front of the pack, on or off-road. The pluses: legit off-road capability, adult size second and third rows, exuberant torque vectoring rear diff. The minus: fuel economy takes a dip, not as quick as before, forgettable styling inside and out. All equals that this is your Pilot speaking, now more directly to driving enthusiasts wherever they may venture. Slugfest. In one of Toyota's most mysterious offerings, we braved DC traffic in search of a secret carpool cabal. Every city has its secrets. Washington, D.C. may have more than most, but I wasn't there to dig up bodies, corporeal or political. My interest in visiting our nation's capital was to find out more about a covert society, an organization of carpoolers who use codes and word of mouth to work around DC's notorious traffic jams and exorbitant tolls. Under cherry blossoms, light as dreams, and in the long shadow of the Washington Monument, I set out in search of slugs. The origins of slugging are murky, buried somewhere in the smoggy 70s when the Shirley Highway, the I 395, from Virginia to DC became the first U.S. freeway to implement the high occupancy vehicle, the HOV lane. Those early carpool lanes were strict, initially requiring 4 occupants, now 3, so commuting drivers would fill their seats by swinging by the bus stop and sniping riders. Eventually, the bus lines had more hopeful carpoolers than mass transit riders, and the bus drivers began referring to the faux passengers as false coins, also known as slugs. Undeterred by the slander, the slugs claimed the nickname, and the prestige and the practice grew in popularity, developing set locations and traditions. When the Virginia Department of Transportation partnered with the private toll road operator Transurban in the early 2000s, multi-person vehicles were exempted from the expensive fees to encourage carpooling, thus keeping the fast lanes flowing free. Slugging is symbiotic. No money changes hands, but all parties benefit. Had I set out to learn the secrets of the slugs a few years ago, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge. According to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments 2019 State of the Commute report, 20% of all carpools were slugs. There are numerous pickup and drop off spots and an active website detailing any route changes due to construction or traffic closures. Then the pandemic hit, and the slug lines were salted. In the 2022 report, only 4% of carpools were slugs, and my initial online research came up against abandoned forums, bounce back emails, and 404 web links. The slugging community seemed to disappear overnight, the Roanoke colony of the 21st century. Nothing is as irresistible as the mystery, especially one with car culture at its center. And a car and driver, we couldn't stop thinking about slugging. You just get in a stranger's car? There's no money? How? Why? I hopped a flight to DC, picked up a pearl white Toyota Crown, and with a back seat big enough for clandestine carpoolers, and set off in search for answers. First stop, the Pentagon. With roughly 20,007 employees, large parking lots, and a metro bus lane, the Pentagon was one of the early slugging destinations and one of the few active slugline Facebook groups I was permitted to join. There are many slugline Facebook groups, but many of them sluggish in posting or fiercely protective of their community. Most of my join requests and all my messages to admins went unanswered. The Pentagon seemed to still be slugging, with regular posts cryptically requesting riders for 234 or offering directions to the pork chop. I decided to check it out in hopes of decoding these secret messages. What stood out to me as an Angelino driving in DC was, first, the speed limits are low and people mostly abide by them. Second, it's a good thing they do because the roads are as tangled as a filibuster. The street names divided into quadrants, roundabouts that exit onto bridges, and constant construction. Even Google gave up, the map on the Crown's center screen flickering in endless recalculation. It didn't help that none of my slugline pickup locations were hard addresses, just intersections pulled from screenshots on the defunct sluglines.com website. At this point, I was parked next to a sign warning that my vehicle and person were subject to search. A police car pulled up next to me. I explained to Officer Bush, it didn't seem prudent to ask if he's related to the former presidents, that I was not doing anything nefarious but was simply stupid, lost, and looking for a slugline pickup. He pointed me to a parking lot 1/2 roundabout over. He hadn't used slugs, he told me, but he knew people who had. You can't speak to anyone, he said. The riders just give the driver a token, and that's how they know where to go. This last bit proves a red herring, but the first part is true. I left the Pentagon with one piece of the puzzle. The slugs did exist. My next lead came from one of the Facebook pages, a link to a WhatsApp group focused on trips between Horner and L'Enfant. I didn't know what Horner or L'Enfant was, but I crossed my fingers and threw a message into the fray. Hi, you can delete this, but I'm trying to learn more about slugging. Would anyone care to talk for a magazine story? A few months later, my message was gone, deleted by admin, but not before I'd had a response. You can call me tonight, Jasmine, and a phone number. That afternoon, photographer Roy Ritchie and I went back to the Pentagon. Just before 4 p.m., office workers and military personnel started lining up along the curb of the parking lot Officer Bush had pointed out. A silver Lincoln Navigator pulled up, two waiting riders climbed in, and it pulled away. A blonde woman walked towards a gray Tesla. She held up her fingers in quick succession, 2, 3, 4. The driver nodded, and she got in the back seat. An older gentleman in a dark jacket joined her, and with its express lane friendly trio, the Tesla left. My initial attempts to converse with waiting slugs met with failure. The riders were sweaty and tired after walking from their offices, earbuds in, eager to leave. Drivers kept their windows up, avoiding eye contact as Richie and I sculled on the periphery. We felt like creeps. I had better luck when I changed my approach from journalist to rookie slug. I want to do this tomorrow, I told a woman in a lavender pantsuit. Will people be upset if I'm new? They only care about getting where they need to go, she answered. She'd started slugging earlier this year when a bus strike disrupted her regular commute. The man next to her was trying it for the first time on the advice of a friend. A hybrid Camry came to the curb, and they nodded to me and took off. By 4:30, the parking lot was sparse, but I felt confident we had enough info to try a slug ride the next morning. But first, I'd hear what Jasmine Smith had to say. I don't blame the Pentagon slugs for their reluctance to talk, but I sure appreciated Smith's willingness. Oh, I always like telling people about it because it's such a strange concept, she told me that evening. Maybe somebody will get inspired, get it organized, and make an app. Smith proved an excellent source, having slugged as both a rider and a driver soon after moving to the DC area in 2016. She acknowledged the scene's weirdness, admitting that at first she couldn't imagine anything that would convince her to get into a stranger's car. I rode the bus, which picked up at the same place as a slug line. Cars would drive up, people would get in, they drove off, and I thought, now these people are getting to work for free, and here I am standing on this bus line paying. Eventually, her curiosity won, and she gave it a try. I got into the city, and I never stopped. Slugging not only saves money, but it's better than standard carpooling because you're never left high and dry due to someone else's poor time management. These days, Smith drives, but she still uses slug lines. Without them, if she takes the faster moving toll lanes, her commute costs nearly $60 a day, just in fees. Drivers further out in Virginia might pay $40 or more each way without two passengers. Slugging makes a lot of sense. Did anyone tell you the rules? Smith asked before we ended the call. No talking, no phone calls, no loud music. The next morning, rules in mind, we left DC while it was still dark. Our destination was the Route 234 park and ride lot, 30 miles outside of town. Not only did it satisfy my curiosity about the coded Facebook messages, but it also proved to be one of the busier afternoon Pentagon destinations, so I was hopeful we might score a morning pickup there. Even at 6 a.m., the traffic coming into the city was daunting. Running down the center of I-95, the cars in the express lanes whizzed by, taunting those crawling on either side. It takes only one experience stuck in DC jam to understand how an hour alone with your road rage can make a half hour with a few polite strangers seem much more appealing. We pulled in near the bus stop, and there they were, in crisp work clothes with papers under their arms, the waiting slugs. I opened the window and drove up. Pentagon, I said, trying to act mature and trustworthy, managing at best a nervous whisper squeak. As two riders stepped forward, I added in a rush, I'm writing a story about this, just so you know, in case you don't want to be part of it. They shrugged and got in the back of the Crown. Just like that, no talk. The whole process took less than a minute. For the first few miles of the drive were eerily quiet. Just the low hum of the Toyota's powertrain, the slightest of shimmies as it tried to decide between gas and electric, operation while we crept forward in stop and go, and the click of Richie's camera. Once we got on the express lane, I broke the law. We're writing about the DC commute and slugging, I said, waving at the camera in explanation. With permission granted, Amit Khan and Deline Aguilar became chatty, bemoaning the high cost of toll lanes and bus fares, peppering me with the questions about the Crown, and celebrating the slow return of slugging post-COVID. Khan works at Georgetown University and has been slugging since 2006, often taking a ride to the Pentagon, then grabbing a bus for the last leg to his office. Aguilar works for the Pentagon, and like several others I met, started riding during the bus strike, but plans to keep it up. as it's both less expensive and 10 minutes quicker on average. What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you as a slug? I asked Khan. He laughed and recounted a ride with a woman whose car was full of food. Like groceries, I asked. No, like unopened emergency food. Half the back seat was cans of beans. I asked what she was prepping for, and she said, I've been there once, and it won't happen again. Richie chimed in, Been where? Hungary in traffic? Khan shrugged. Some mysteries remain. The king of slugs. The Toyota Crown has been on hiatus in the States since the 1970s, but in Japan, it did the job Ford's Panther platform did here, serving as taxi, police car, and choice transportation for government officials. The new version coming to the US is a well-suited, fairing multiple adults, with its tall body and an available platinum trim featuring leather upholstery and a glass roof. It's a quirky and intriguing car, well aligned thematically with the quirks and intrigue of slugging. Our top trim slugger, with the 264 horsepower turbo 4 and electric motors combining to produce 340 horsepower, starts at $53,445. The entry level Crown, which has a 236 horsepower hybrid powertrain with a 2.5 liter inline 4, kicks off at $41,045.